Hey writers, it's Megan coming at you live in All Writers Welcome. And today I'm going to be talking about showing versus telling. I know this is a perennial question that writers have. What is showing? What is telling? Why is one better than the other? How do I do the one that's better than the other? And it's a question that's been coming up in the group recently. So I thought this would be a great way to tackle it. If you have questions about showing versus telling, I invite you to put them into the comments and I will get to questions and answer them as they come in. So I'd love to hear from you. And if you're watching this recording, then make sure you post your questions in the group if you still have additional questions about showing versus telling. All right, so let us jump right in. The probably number one piece of advice that writers hear is show, don't tell, right? People repeat this. It's like, if there's only one rule of writing, it's show, don't tell. And I think it is definitely worth going through those terms and understanding what we mean when we say show and when we say tell. So the first thing I want to do is say that there are different kinds of telling. And telling has a bad rap, right? Because we say show, don't tell, but there's actually a good kind of telling. And the good kind of telling, or telling generally, is just summarizing, is you going through all the details for us and just giving us the most important bits. Now, telling is really important if you need to make time pass in your book. Telling is really important if you have a complicated world structure and you need to summarize things and you need to give us kind of like the main takeaways. And telling is also important to kind of fast forward through the boring parts of your story. And if you didn't have any telling in your story at all, it would all be in the moment, live right now. Now, some books are written that way. If you read Lee Child's Jack Reacher series, they all unfold in real time. I mean, there might be here and there a summary of, for the next week they looked into it, but it's mostly real time showing us, putting us into the scene. Now, that makes Jack Reacher novels really intense. And that's appropriate for the genre. They are action, detective kind of, solve a crime, catch the bad guys. And they're really meant to be exciting and full of drama and suspense. But if you're writing in a genre that's not supposed to be really tense, you absolutely have to break up your shows with some tells to give your reader a break. If you just are constantly showing, we don't get time to digest, and it can be really intense for us as readers. We're in the moment by moment. So that's the positive kind of telling. It helps you move us to a different, 3 weeks ahead of time or fast forward through things. So telling can be good. But why is it not good most of the time? Why do people give us this advice, show, don't tell? Well, it's because showing is putting the reader in the scene to experience your book for herself. Telling is you giving the summary. So it's kind of the difference between you going to see the great movie and your friend going to see the great movie and then telling you all about it. It's not the same experience, right? You go see a movie because you want the full experience. You want to be immersed. You want the images. You want the sounds. You want to be sitting on the edge of your seat or crying at the sad parts or laughing at the funny parts. And when your friend retells it to you, it's not going to be the same. So that's the bottom line. If you're wondering, what is showing versus telling and why is showing better? That's it in a nutshell. It's because showing allows your reader to experience your book firsthand. So let's talk about now kind of the subtleties of showing. I've already said you don't have to show all of the time. There are parts where definitely you want to summarize because you want to create a break in a tense moment or you want to fast forward time. But there are times when showing is more key and when you can get away with doing some telling and other times when you can't. So let's talk about this kind of middle ground. If you are using a summary to tell me about a character's emotion at the time, that's not going to be as interesting as if you give me a show and I get to see that character. And I was just kind of playing around with ideas, and I came up with, a couple of examples. So a tell of this character's emotion might be Linda was upset. Okay, that's fine. I could read that in the story and not have any complaints. But compare that with Linda gasped and went pale. Her shoulders slumped. Then I get to experience it, right? So that's a time when you get to decide as an author, do I really want somebody to see the emotion for themselves, or is it okay if I tell it? And whether you show or tell depends on how important the scene is. If Linda is my main character, then probably I want to show this to you directly. I want you to be able to be there on her journey with her. On the other hand, if Linda is a tertiary character and she's only in this one scene, then it's not as important, right? You're like, okay, that's fine. I'll take your word for it, author. You can just tell me she's upset, and then let's move on to the main event. So you have to decide how important something is in your story, to decide whether we need to see it for ourselves or you can just tell us. And Danielle says, but can't showing sometimes make a book long-winded? Absolutely. Yes. If every small detail about every character is shown rather than told to us, yeah, we will just be in there, for forever. And, depending on the genre, that might be appropriate. If you're reading Jane Austen or George Eliot, you're reading basically like every moment of the day and the character's observations, but those do make for very long books, and that's certainly not appropriate for every genre. So Danielle, this is such a great point that, we hear show don't tell, and then if we follow that to the letter, yeah, we will be keeping our readers there for way longer than was important. And also they would miss out on, as authors, we need to be cueing our readers about what's important and what's not. And you may have experienced this watching a TV show or a movie. If there's a scene that is very detailed, we're cued to think, oh my gosh, something's going to happen. And if nothing does happen, we feel let down. We feel like it was, like we were led to believe something was going to happen. And the one place where this works is in horror movies. Because when we watch a horror movie, we know at some point something scary is going to happen. And what directors do to mess with our heads is show a really detailed scene where we're like, oh, this is going to be the part where the monster jumps out. And the monster doesn't jump out. It works in a horror movie because, again, it's building that tension. But yeah, absolutely, you cannot show us everything. We will be bored to tears and you'll lose that momentum. Caitlin says, I'm going to show the battle scene, but I'm going to tell about the boat ride back to her village. Yes, absolutely. I love it, right? Think about you're going to the movie. Which scene would you rather watch, the battle or the boat ride? I would definitely rather watch the battle, way more exciting. So, and Caitlin, you bring up a great point, because I mentioned you want to show the scenes that are more important, but you also want to show the scenes that are more interesting. Please don't make me watch your character go grocery shopping unless there's something really interesting about the way he goes grocery shopping. Great comments, you guys. I love those. So I gave you an example of a place where you could decide what was going to work better, a show or a tell, and it was for an emotion. And now I want to talk about a place where it's usually harmful if you give us a tell rather than a show for a main character, at least. Again, if this is a background character, that's no problem. But for an emotion, there's a choice. For a key characteristic, your readers tend to feel cheated if you are telling them what the key characteristics are of your character. And it's, we're here to have an experience. People are reading your book because they want to become immersed in the world. They want to be able to view it first. So if you're telling them secondhand, it's less exciting. So I'm going to go back to this scene with Linda, and I described her as upset. So now what if I've got a main character, Joe? If I simply tell you Joe is mean, you're like, oh, I guess I have to take your word for it. But if I tell you Joe smirked, failed like your art career. Linda gasped and went pale, her shoulders slumped. Joel whistled as he strode out of the room, not looking back. Okay, now you know Joe is mean, and Linda is upset, and you didn't have to take my word for it. So it's it's a kind of a choice point if it's an emotion, but if it's a key characteristic, why would you take that away from your readers to get to experience for themselves? Why would you make us rely on your opinion, right? That's why we're there. That's why we're reading books. And if we have too much telling about people's key characteristics, what it can do is take readers out of the reality of the world and remind them that there's a narrator. And most people are not reading a book because they want you, the author, to tell them something. There's this very weird thing that happens when we pick up a book. We know it's a book. We know it is a fictional story. We see, title of book by Caitlin Pickett Bowell. But then we start reading and we believe that these are real people really doing things, and anything that takes us out of that is disconcerting, and it's not fun, it's not pleasant. We suspend disbelief, and great shows actually help your readers suspend disbelief. Okay, so that's really the breakdown of show versus tell. It's not as simple as show, don't tell. There's sometimes to tell. There's sometimes when telling can be really harmful. But I want to talk about places where it's really important to show, and then we'll move into how to show. So the places it's really important to show are, first of all, exciting scenes. Caitlin was talking about having a battle scene. It's also important to show key moments in the arc of your character. The first time we see your character, we want that to be a show. We want to be able to examine and make judgments for ourselves about who this is. We don't want to start a story and say, there's Joe, he's a mean guy, he goes around doing mean stuff to people, right? That doesn't draw us in. But a scene, a show where we get to watch him, that will draw us in. Whenever your character is making key choices or key decisions, this is another place where showing is so much more effective than telling. Instead of it was hard for Linda to decide whether or not to pursue her art career. We could be getting the front row view, the firsthand view of that. And then, as I mentioned, the key characteristics and traits is another place we want to get to be in there firsthand. All right, so how do you show? What's involved in that? Telling is summarizing, showing is putting the reader there. And of course, that means utilizing the five senses, but really it's about making the translation in your mind between what is happening and how do I know that's true. And if you just think about your own life, we do this all the time without anybody telling us how other people are feeling. How do I know if my friend is happy or sad? By body language, right? Is she slumped? What kind of posture does she have? What's her facial expression? What tone of voice does she have? Many of you can probably tell in seconds when you first see a friend or a partner, is this person having a problem? Is this person having a great day or a lousy day? We're making these immediate conclusions. And what are they based on? Body language and posture, facial expression, tone of voice, talkativeness. So they're just like these really everyday common sense kinds of things that you already know that you can put into your writing. And that's what shows rather than tells that somebody is upset or is happy or any of these pieces. So are there any questions right now for anybody who's watching about shows, about how to write effective shows, about when to use tells? Hit me with your questions. What do you want to know about showing or telling, or what do you find frustrating as a reader? Think about your own experiences as a reader when you're writing. What are your pet peeves? Have you read books where, like Danielle was pointing out, maybe absolutely every moment and every scene is described in great detail and you just feel like you're stuck there forever? Or have you, read books where the exciting parts were kind of skipped over? What's your experience with show and tell? So if you have a question, I invite you to put it in the comments. If you are looking for authors to read who really do a fantastic job of showing, I highly recommend John Steinbeck. He does a great job of really putting us in the scene. So just picking up any of his books, of Mice and Men in particular, just within a few pages, you really get into the world of these characters, just from him describing colors, sounds, shapes. The mood is really imparted. But it makes such a difference when, the reason that we're given this advice, show, don't tell, is because readers do want the experience of being in your book. But don't be afraid of telling, don't be afraid of summarizing. It's a matter of choosing what the right moment is and asking, is this something that the reader would feel cheated if he didn't get to experience firsthand? So you'll definitely have to use your own judgment on that, but I've given you a list of places, your climactic scene, introducing the first character, and key decision points. These should all be things we get to see firsthand. Yvonne says, I think one of my pet peeves is when an author thinks showing just means using more words. You can show just as effectively, if not more, with concise sentences as with long, wordy ones. Oh my goodness, yes, absolutely. And I think actually that's why I really love John Steinbeck as an example of showing, because he is an economic writer. He is not throwing a lot of adjectives at us. He is not describing things until he's beaten them to death. Right? He's giving us important things to look at, and it's like you're the tour guide. So you want to point out, you want to show, as in like indicate to people what they should be looking at. But a good tour guide doesn't talk your ear off, right? A good tour guide's like, oh, there are the mountains. Oh yeah, those mountains are really beautiful. I love that point, Yvonne. Thank you so much for sharing that. It definitely doesn't mean you have to write a lot. It definitely doesn't mean you have to use a lot of adjectives. And going back again to Lee Child, who writes, again, I was saying in that like kind of all you're in the middle of the action. There are really simple ways that's achieved. It's not with more words, it's with carefully selected words. So think about vivid verbs. Going back to the example, like gasping or smirking. That's one word, but that kind of word choice, and please feel free to say, Megan, that could have been stated better. Of course it could. This is me just, sketching out what would be a show I could share with you guys. But choosing one word that's really vivid and that brings something to mind for people is worth way more than a dozen words that you're cramming in because you feel like you had to. All right, so if you have more questions about shows and tells, again, I invite you to put them into the comments. Let's keep this conversation going. Danielle wrote, sometimes it's hard to find the right descriptive words to show character emotions. You don't want to sound boring or be too wordy. You want the right words to create wow-like impact. Absolutely. And it's worthwhile to say that this is not something that you're necessarily doing as you're drafting the first time around. Sometimes as we're drafting, we get that inspiration and we know precisely the word we want to use. And other times it's on, a round of revising, or after we've put one section of the story away for a while and worked somewhere else, and then we can come back to it. Because finding just the right word is more a matter of, it when you see it, right? You can sit there and try quite a few, but I think for most writers, it's like, oh, I need that inspiration. And I think also this is a place in showing where it's easy for us to get trapped in cliches. And I know this is something that stymies a lot of writers. Her cheeks were as red as roses, or maybe her lips were as red as roses. And you go, oh, I'm trying to show you something really clearly, but that's been used so many times. That's a hackneyed phrase. And that can stop a lot of writers from showing as well. But it doesn't, a great show doesn't have to be something extraordinarily different. This is not, how do I want to say this? It should be in your natural writing voice. If you were going to just stop and describe what you saw, it doesn't have to be flowery. It doesn't have to have, SAT style vocab words, esoteric words that very few people use in their writing. It's really just letting people see how you see. And actually the most compelling shows are those that are unique to the voice of the author, where we get to see things through your eyes. So, keep that in mind. It's not about the most beautiful flowery phrase. It's really just, okay, I have a voice as an author and as a narrator. how would I describe this? If you're having a hard time getting into your shows, I highly recommend free writing. This is not surprising to anybody who knows me in the group, right? I'm always saying free writing, but that lifts the pressure, right? So if you want to just get into that mode of your brain where you're thinking about what do I see, then free writing gives you the freedom to write down everything you see without going, oh, there's no way I'm going to spend a page and a half, actually describing what the barn looks like. That's fine. You're not working on your draft when you're free writing, right? Give yourself the freedom, go in the story, look around at that barn and write down absolutely everything you see, then look back at your free write and ask, okay, what of this, if anything, is important or relevant to include in my draft. And if you are thinking, oh, free writing, that sounds like something that could be interesting for me, we have a whole free writing module in the All Writers Welcome Academy that we're putting together. And the way we're doing the free writes is you can just look at the sheet if you are self-directed and you go, okay, I know how I free write and I just want to look at the prompt and the questions, and they're filed under like, what's your intention, right? So like, I need to develop my setting more, there's a free write. I need to know more about my character's backstory, there's a free write. And if you're cool with just, like, oh, I want to just look and I'll follow along, you can do that. But they're also recorded as audio recordings, so you can follow along and actually write in real time. So if you're interested in free writing and you feel like that's something that would help your writing, let me know and I'll tell you more about the All Writers Welcome Academy. We're actually having an upcoming webinar where you'll be able to hear more about that. So I'll actually post the link to that webinar in the comments here. Okay, I'm going to wrap unless there are any last questions. If anybody wants to throw something in, feel free. But again, let's keep this conversation going. Thank you so much for the really fantastic questions and comments that y'all brought who were live on this video. And I'm looking forward to hearing more. I think this is a place that can become such a burden for authors when we're, laboring under a misconception that everything has to be a show. And it can be so freeing when we figure out how to use shows effectively and that also there's room for telling. All right, thanks so much for joining me. I will catch you guys later in the group. Have an awesome rest of your day.